Hello, I'm Amber Keegan and welcome to the Rogue Monkey podcast.
Hello, listeners and viewers. Thank you for joining us for episode 97. My name is Kevin and I'm the host of the Rogue Monkey podcast. For anyone new to the show, our podcast is here to share stories that will help you find your way, personally, professionally, or academically. We speak to people from all walks of life and explore how they've overcome hurdles and navigated their journey on the path to success. Today, I'm joined by an elite athlete who has had an incredibly challenging yet inspiring journey. In our last episode, we spoke to a marathon runner, and today's conversation is with a marathon swimmer. Our guest is international open water swimmer Amber Keegan. Having qualified for a GB junior team at the age of just 16, Amber has since been on a decade-long journey of ups and downs. And today we explore and have some frank discussions around how she got through those challenging years, who she has around her, and the lessons she's taken from the rocky road of elite sport. Across her journey, Amber has become an inspiring ambassador for athletes speaking out about their experiences and the need for more support when it comes to athlete mental health. We're buzzing to share that this coming week, Amber will dive into the sea at her second World Championships wearing a GB hat, and we could not be more excited for her. So let's get into it, and episode 97, and our conversation with international swimmer and the founder of Athlete Interactions, Amber Keegan. Hello, Amber, and welcome to the podcast. How are you doing?
Very good. Thank you for having me. How are you?
Yeah, really good. Excited to explore your journey. I've seen it from afar, read about it in magazines, and we've crossed paths a couple of times over the last few years. But yeah, really excited to kind of explore your experiences and also talk about what's coming up in the next few months, because it's a very exciting time for you.
Yes.
Okay, well, let's for the uninitiated, if you can just give our listeners and viewers out there just a kind of a bit of an overview and an introduction as to who is Amber and a bit about your story.
Yeah, so I'm Amber, Amber Keegan. I'm now 26. I'm based in Sheffield. I swim with City of Sheffield Swim Squad, which is what most people know me for. I used to be a 400 medley swimmer. That's where I started out my junior career and most of my senior career. And then after I failed to make Birmingham Commonwealth Games, I switched to open water, which was a little bit of a risk quite late in my career, but it's a risk that's paid off and I've really enjoyed it. Outside of the pool, I'm also doing a PhD in chemical engineering. That was what brought me to Sheffield originally. I, with the help of some other wonderful athletes, set up a not-for-profit organisation called Athlete Interactions around female athlete mental health. And yeah, I do lots of other things as well, like writing and dog walking. But yeah, that's me in a nutshell.
Fantastic. Well, there's lots of threads for us to pull on there, but I'm kind of really keen to explore kind of those early years, because very often when we're 7, 8, 9 and we kind of get into our sports that form part of our early years, there's an innocence to it and perhaps a naivety as to what lays ahead. So kind of what got you into swimming in those early years, and kind of what was your experience when you first started out?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think they're such formative experiences for all of us, whether we go on to become elite athletes or not. They're a huge part of our lives and what makes us who we are as people. So I started swimming like most kids that are lucky enough to, in the sense that it's a life skill, isn't it? My parents wanted me to be safe in the water, so I did council lessons. I really enjoyed them. I did a lot of sports as a kid. I ran, I played hockey, I think I did basketball for a bit, I did athletics, I did lots of different things, but for some reason swimming kind of stuck with me more than others, potentially because I'm incredibly clumsy and notorious for trips and things. So probably me being in water was the safest bet. But I joined a club because my parents both joined a club just for fitness. I think they swam like twice, maybe 3 times a week. And it just made sense because I really like swimming and wanted to do a little bit more as well, just to put me in at the same time as them. And I don't think any of us expected that it would effectively take over all 3 of our lives, but I just really love the sport. I was super competitive and really enjoyed the competition side of swimming as well. And I just like being in the water, and it's like anything. Like I said, when you start out, you don't expect it to really take you anywhere. When I was a kid, like making counties was more than I ever dreamed of. And then I did that and I was like, wow, what's next? And then I made Midlands and I made Nationals. And yeah, I think it kind of crept up on me, I guess. It's been a huge part of my life since I was 9 when I made Nova, which is a county squad in Nottingham. And yeah, since then, it's been a ginormous part of my life.
So let's talk about that. You use the word almost, it crept up on you. And I think that's the case with a lot of athletes that start sport early. They perhaps when they're younger. Yeah, definitely. And yeah, especially when they're young, the pressures and the impact it has on not just the person's life, but also the support team around them. And I'm sure we'll explore that a little bit later. But what's kind of your earliest memory of when it kind of went from being the innocent childhood for fitness activity to, okay, this is getting a little bit more serious? Was there a realization of any specific point, or was it very much gradual?
I think for me, the realization probably came not until I made European Juniors. So that was 2013, so quite a while ago now. But so I must have been 16 at the time, because the age brackets were a bit different back then. And I'd always kind of looked to the next thing. Like I'd made counties, thought about regionals, made regionals, thought about nationals, made nationals, saw friends getting medals, wanted one. And at that age, I never had. And it was, I think I surprised a lot of people when I made European Juniors, like quite often in the lead in, just from like seeing kids' times and stuff, you kind of have an idea who you expect to make a team. And I don't think a lot of people thought that would be me. I also hadn't been very well like the year before. I had a really bad, still never really got a full answer, but I had basically a horrific headache for like a year. And I think in hindsight, it was probably stress, although I didn't really admit or understand that at the time. So I hadn't really been anywhere on the map leading into that. And myself and Rosie Reardon, who's also from Nova, we were teammates, had trained together since we were 9 and both made European Juniors that year. And I think that was the first moment where I knew I kind of had hoped to hit the time. But after I did that and people started kind of coming up to me and saying stuff, and I was like, oh, actually, like maybe this is more than a hobby. And it had already taken up more hours of my life than a normal hobby would before that. But that was the first moment where I was like, well, maybe there is something here, and it'd be cool to see what. Yeah.
Well, we're going to, I guess, dive into that period between 2013 and now, but I'm curious as to that first experience on the international stage, because, you know, it's Olympic year. There's so many people that I guess idolize a lot of the athletes that they're going to be exposed to in such a range of sports this year. And too often it becomes, it can become quite singular about, say, an Olympics or whatever it is. But actually, when you're a child and you're first thrust, if you like, into the professional sporting world, and you make your GB team, and where was the event that you traveled to?
Poznan in Poland.
Okay, so again, you suddenly, instead of Sheffield or Glasgow or Liverpool or wherever they're holding the nationals, it's suddenly you're in mainland Europe, and it's what was that experience like, kind of going into it? I guess eyes wide open.
Yeah, it was just really good fun, to be honest. And I think I loved the racing side. I loved turning up to an event and it feeling like an event. In the same way that if you go to your first nationals, you've got all the kind of like sponsor boards and it just feels big. And European Juniors just kind of felt like a step up from that. And I remember just walking around and being like, I want more of this. Like, this is cool. And I want this again. And I want bigger. And really enjoyed the racing, particularly for people, I think, that do distance events. Sometimes in the UK, you can get lucky. You have a really good age group where you've got a lot of people to race, or maybe there's only a few of you, but you still always have a good race. But even then, kind of sometimes it's often maybe 3 or 4 people kind of almost vying for like one spot. And it was my first real international racing experience. And I really enjoyed the fact that there was lots of people kind of doing the same times, and that the competition was really good. And I really enjoyed the racing side of it. And it was really cool as well, wearing that GB hat on a junior team for the first time. Like, I'd looked up to so many people who'd worn that hat, and it was cool for it to be me. And yeah, really enjoyed it, wanted more. And yeah, I guess that's where I start to think bigger about swimming.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because if you take away the international words associated with it, the element of I enjoyed the experience, I love the competitiveness, I wanted to put on the team hat, you know, whether it was a GB hat or any team hat, there's lots of elements there that I'm sure a lot of aspiring young athletes, you know, I made the trials for the school team and I wanted to put on the kit for the first time.
100%.
You know, there's that kind of that ambition and that excitement that I'm sure we'll see a spike in participation this year just off the back of that, whether the kids are going to go on to the Olympics or just play in their local school teams. Actually, there's an excitement about getting involved and being part of something. And, there's so much research that talks about, I guess, what comes next after that. And I think for everyone, they experience it differently. And for most people with very little involvement in the sport historically, they might just assume it's just a nice straight line and you kind of make European juniors or whatever your junior team is in your sport and it just carries on in a nice straight line. And the term rocky road has been thrown around quite a few times, and not the culinary sense, but I guess the experience of actually the ups and downs that followed. And I guess coming back from that, you are excited and motivated and you want more and all those sorts of things. But let's talk a little bit, I guess, about what came next.
Yeah, I mean, I was one of those people too. I was like, great, I've made European juniors. Here we go. Next year, more PBs. Next year after, more PBs. Maybe a senior team within a few years. Like that was where my brain went, and that was certainly where kind of me and my coach were planning for. But obviously, you plan for best case scenario, and that doesn't always happen in sport. And I struggled so much after European juniors. Firstly, kind of the 2 years after that, I just hit this massive plateau. Like I went so far backwards, and I didn't understand. Like I just didn't understand. I remember going from like the British champs after European juniors. I didn't even make the final in 4am, and I really should have done. Like that should have been, for where I was at the time, a fairly simple ask. Not an easy ask, but a simple ask. And I remember just like sitting in the stands watching that final thinking, what am I doing? Like, what has happened? And obviously my coach was telling me not to freak out, and obviously I was freaking out. And that kind of plateau, like whether you made a team or not, I think is so common, especially in teenage girls. And there are so many things that contributed to that. You've got exam stress, you've got everything changing around you, like your body's going through puberty and you can't really see what your hormones are doing. And that's frustrating because sometimes they are going to make you slower for a bit. And then on top of it as well, like I had a huge training load as a kid. And I don't really think I've seen many people that can train like that from a very young age and do a lot of meters and not experience a really long plateau. I'm no coach. I'm not going to sit here and say what the best or worst way to train a kid is, but I've never seen anyone train as much as people like me did as a teenager and not have a really long period where they then don't move on. I'm not saying that's good or bad, but that's just what seems to happen anecdotally. And I just went absolutely backwards for like 2 years. And it was really embarrassing. I'd gone from like this high of like, oh, I'm actually I've done these huge PBs, I've made European juniors, to like, where am I? I was nowhere near where I needed to be to make a senior team or anything in between that. Obviously they have under 21s now, and I think that's really awesome. I hope it continues because I think it's a great stepping stone and something else for people to aim for. But kind of even World Junior Games, which I don't think Britain sent a team to last year, but that would have been such a long way off for me at the time. And I still liked swimming, but I really struggled during that period. Like my motivation was not always high. And then, I mean, the years after that, I then got a ton of injury and illnesses as well. And it took me 10 years to go from a junior team to a senior team, which is not a normal story. And I don't think that says anything special about me. I think there's lots of other people who maybe, if they'd wanted to stick around, like could have also done the same thing. But it was 10 years. It's a long time to give to something with no guarantee that it's actually going to pay off. It's a little bit bonkers. I'm not sure if I'd recommend it or not, to be honest. But yeah, for me, it's worked out. But yeah.
It's really interesting, I think, because there's so many life lessons, I guess, that come out of that period. But one of the things I think that's not acknowledged or talked about enough is actually the support team that has to get you through that, because it's relatively easy, and not in a horrible way, but it's a relatively easy thing to rally around people when they're winning. Go, yeah, it's going well. I'm happy to do this because here comes the success. But it's really hard to have a week, then a month, then a season, then 2 seasons with the thousands and thousands of pounds just in monetary terms. Forget the social impact of lack of all the other things that you do, and then your parents, siblings, all of those sorts of things that come with the sporting journey. And I think there needs to be this kind of recognition that actually the sporting journey does really very much mirror the life journey. It's not one straight, smooth line where you just bounce perfectly from step to step and everything just gets better. And I think too often, because of those early years in sport where you're growing, developing, getting stronger and faster, and the results keep getting better, we just assume that's going to continue. And I don't know if that's an education piece around working with parents and working with coaches, and as a sport, working culturally to actually explain to people that the sport doesn't work like that. It does in certain times, but I think I'd be really curious from a numbers point of view to see how many people last those 2, 3, 4, 5, 10-year transition periods and then come out the other side and go, I enjoy my sport again, because the vast majority we lose, and the membership data shows that. So in your experience from that support team that got you across that period, what were the key elements of that? Who were the key elements of that? And what were the turning points that helped you overcome these hurdles?
Yeah, I think if I start with support elements and then go on to the people, because I think really the most important thing was unconditional support. Unconditional. And I've really emphasised that because it is not present in the vast majority of places in our sport and the vast majority of places in sport. And I had times training in environments where I certainly did not feel that support would be unconditional. It's one reason I came to Sheffield, because actually I did feel like they would put me first, and I was right. But all of those periods, whether it was when I tore my hamstring, when I got hit by my car, like when I was recovering from my eating disorder, there was never, we are only supporting you because we think you're going to be good at swimming, or anything like that. Or we're only supporting from my parents, from my coaches, and support staff around the pool, because they were the main people that got me through. And help was always available to me, and as much of it as I needed, no matter how far off the map I was. I don't think you can honestly say in a lot of coaching environments, I don't think you can honestly say that the people who need the support most are the ones who get it, regardless of how good or not good they're swimming. But that was what was offered to me. And that wasn't necessarily time on poolside. It wasn't time away from the other people that, say, when I was injured, would be in the pool and training hard. That would be a coffee away from the pool, away from other people's training times, to make sure I was doing okay as a person. And I was never rushed. I was never pressured to get back to fitness, get back to racing fitness. I mean, I remember, so Mike Taylor, who's my coach now, the first meeting we had together when he was my coach and I'd just been injured at the time, was trying to come back from it. He gave me a plan with like 4 45-minute sessions, I think was my first week with him. And he sat me down and he was like, I don't want you to take this the wrong way, but I don't care if you never race again. And I instantly was like, you what? He was like, no, wait. He was like, I don't care if you never race again. I want to get you better. I want to get you healthy. I want you to be able to enjoy this sport again. And if that means that you decide you want to race and you can race, then fantastic. And if it doesn't, then no worries. But my aim here is to get you better. And that attitude, like that kind of one interaction, sums up how I was supported at Sheffield all the way through the years and years and years of being an absolute kelp and being nowhere on the map and being nowhere close to a team. And I've just made my second senior team. And I would not have made that without feeling like the support that I was given was not dependent on how good a swimmer I was going to be at the end of it. And my parents were exactly the same. It was, we'll support you and we'll help out with swimming where we can, because we know that you like it and you love it and that it gives you valuable life skills, not because they thought I'd ever make a team. I mean, I'm sure they hoped I did, but I'm also sure they probably thought I wouldn't for a long period of time, and that would be a sensible thing to think. That's not a criticism. I was so far off the map. It was a bit silly, but yeah, unconditional support, and particularly kind of from my parents, who particularly during my younger years at uni also supported me financially, which I know not everybody is lucky enough to have, but the truth of our sport is that it's really hard to do it without. I added it up the other day, I have 7 ad hoc jobs. I have a part-time PhD, it was full-time until this year, and then 6 other jobs alongside that. most of which I'm not doing every week, but like that's how I have to make ends meet. And to actually help me to do that during uni, I did have support from my parents alongside working, alongside studying, alongside swimming, and my teammates as well. I'd say I'm a pretty good teammate to have around now. I'd say during periods of my injury and illness, I probably wasn't. And it's quite hard to admit that because I value myself on trying to give positively to the people I'm around. But I definitely wasn't for periods. When I was depressed, I wasn't a good person to have around, but they checked in on me every day. People were there for me every day. I once couldn't attend a race in Marseille. I've still never done the Marseille competition. And the girls from the Sheffield squad at the time took a potato with it, drew a smiley face on it, and took it around with them and sent them photos of me so that they could pretend I was there with them. And it was such a silly, silly thing, but like it really meant a lot to me that they made an effort to try and stay connected with me and share the journey with me, even though I couldn't be a part of it. And truly kind of the friends I've made through swimming are my family. Like you get born into a family and you also get to choose a family. And if I have a 3 a.m. phone call, the people on my speed dial are the ones that I swam with. Kind of, you've been through a lot with each other, I think, when you see each other at the highs and lows. And those teammates I've had around me over the years have definitely been crucial to I guess me enjoying my life as a person as well as me getting better. And yeah, for all of them as well, it was Amber the person first, not Amber the swimmer.
So let's wave a magic wand and time travel back to 2013, and 26-year-old Amber is going to have a conversation with Amber going into her first European Juniors. What would be and also on top of that, maybe as a second part to that question, what would you say to your parents in the run up to that event? Because I think we all, as I said, we love it when it's all going well, and up to that point it was relatively smooth sailing. So what would you say to yourself going back a decade, but also what would you say to your parents on the run into that event?
I would probably tell myself that it was going to be harder than I could ever imagine. I was going to hit lows that I did not think I would ever find a way out of, but that also the highs would be so much better than I could ever imagine, and that truly life gets better, and eventually kind of it would all be, every day would be beyond my wildest dreams, and that it would all be worth it to get there. There was a lot of really, really dark periods and places during those 10 years, and honestly, if you told me even 5 years ago that I'd be a happy person, I'm not sure I'd believe you. Like, I've always been bubbly, but that doesn't necessarily mean someone's always happy. And yeah, that's probably what I'd want myself to know more than anything. And yeah, it's actually, I don't think I'd believe it if I went back 10 years and told myself everything I needed to know. I'd probably tell myself to give myself a break a bit more as well. I still probably need to tell myself that nowadays, but yeah, certainly not as bad as I was. And honestly, I think I'd probably just tell my parents thank you more than anything. I think as an adult, I'm quite good for making them know how much I've appreciated their help and support over the years. In 2013, 16-year-old Amber was probably not that good at showing her gratitude or really understanding the amount of time and effort and energy and support that kind of my parents put in. And I think that's quite a typical thing for a teenager, but I do still feel pretty guilty looking back when I'd get in the car and my dad would ask me how training had been, and I'd be like, fine, I just want to sit there in silence because I was really tired. But yeah, I think honestly I just want to thank them if I could go back then. I have now, obviously. But yeah, maybe I'd give them that gratitude a few years earlier.
It's interesting because it obviously everyone's lens is relative to the point in time in which they're at. But if you fast forward to say being 30 and you've got a PhD under your belt, you've got at least two world. It's going to be a busy one. But then you add in all your swimming achievements to that point, the hurdles that you've come across. I'm curious as to when you're going through those dark spaces and almost like a tunnel that seems like there's no light at the end. When did you feel like that corner started to get turned, and what were the key moments and experiences of, I guess, coming out of that rut?
I'd say there's been a lot of corners, and in the sense that I love my life now, but it has been ridiculous. Like the shopping list of things that have gone wrong in my career has been probably the hardest thing. There's been a lot of times I thought I've turned a corner and thought things are on the up again, only to be absolutely crushed when something else happens. Like 5 years in a row of like serious medical issues is not normal. And you add to that like normal life things that knock you for six, whether that's kind of uni being really stressful or graduating or kind of changing careers or kind of like relatives dying. Like these are things that happen to all of us, and they're all really hard without piling on other things going around that. And I yeah, so I think I will double back to kind of what's helped me turn those corners. But I think the before I say that, like the hardest thing has been when thing after thing has gone wrong, still trusting that maybe this time it'll work out. And I would say I didn't trust that a lot of the time. And it's kind of when we talk about obstacles, we think about getting through one thing at once a lot of the time, right? But what we don't think about is almost that cumulative effect of like the previous obstacles that you've had. And sure, you learn things from everyone, but everyone also makes you really tired if you don't have time to properly bounce back before the next one hits you. So I think that was the hardest thing. And the reason I say that is because I don't think it's often just as simple as turning a corner. It is, like you say, you don't kind of go from, it's not a straight line. Progress isn't a straight line, and getting better from obstacles isn't a straight line either. If I think back, there's a few corners that stick out to me. So one of them was kind of doing my first full week of training after, so I got hit by a Land Rover in 2017 or 2018, and it was kind of a really, really rough, long road to recovery because I tore my hamstring 2016, sorry, 27, start again. I tore my hamstring in 2017, injured my shoulder in 2018, and then wait, these dates aren't working. Let's forget the dates. So 3 years in a row, I'd first torn my hamstring and then got a shoulder injury and then got hit by a car. And every single time I got back up to that first week of full training again, which kind of took different amounts of times each time, but that was always a cornerstone for me. It was in numbers. I had in numbers that I was back to where I was. And that kind of the physical side of the recovery, I think, was really easy to have that kind of cornerstone piece, if that makes sense. But for the mental side, I don't think there ever was huge moments or like bombshell moments. Like when I was depressed or when I was coming out of my eating disorder, it wasn't like, oh, one day's rainy and the next day's everything's sunshine and rainbows again. But there would be these small moments of hope along the way. Like I'd go out for a meal with friends and realise that I actually really enjoyed myself and I wasn't just pretending to enjoy myself. Or I'd realise I'd eaten a food that used to terrify me and not given it a second thought. And there was, I wouldn't say ever one big cornerstone where mental health is concerned, but there was like a lot of little of these kind of magical moments that made me sit back and go, oh wow, like things are better. And I think that's often most obvious when we have big milestones, like Christmases, for example. Last year's, 2022's Christmas was good, but 2023 Christmas, like I cooked, I had some wine, I didn't count a single calorie, I didn't feel guilty for anything I ate, I didn't over-exercise to make up for it, I didn't under-eat in the run up to Christmas or after Christmas, and I don't think most people can say that, and they're really kind of healthy things to have, and our entire society struggles with diet culture. But it's those big events, like maybe a competition where for the first time you're not feeling like you don't deserve to be there, or you've got a Christmas where you get through it healthily and happily. I think it's those big occasions where we can often like look back and realize how far we've come. But I think it's less about one big cornerstone and more about just realizing that gradually things are getting better and better and better. And yeah, I'd still say I wouldn't say I look back in terms of I reflect a lot, but I say most days I have a moment of how cool is it that like I get to do this, or how awesome is it that like I wake up happy, or how nice is it that I get to kind of spend time with the people I love. So yeah, I don't think there's necessarily big cornerstones. We'd all like to think we have this magic moment where one day we wake up and turn the page and everything's better, but I think sometimes it is helpful to reflect and think about, oh, actually, like I am doing better. Actually, a few of these things have been more regular. Yeah, bit of a rambly answer there.
No, I think it's interesting because last year, an athlete I've the pleasure of working with, previous won a number of Olympic medals, spoke about the fact that more Olympic medals wouldn't make him happy. And I think the understanding that that single moment or a single thing isn't what determines your acute happiness. And I think there's a lot of, everyone experiences that in their own way, but I think there's some really interesting points there, because I guess there is that hope, of course, that, oh, this is going to be the time where I'm going to get away from this health challenge or this injury, whatever it is. And actually, to get knocked back again and again and again, you have to hold on to something much deeper than that, and it affects you. It cuts you deeper in that way as well, because the deeper you go to find hope when something doesn't pan out, the harder it hits you. And I'd be really curious, I guess, in a place now where obviously you do a lot of support work and initiatives to support other athletes, and obviously being that much older and wiser and reflective over more of a, I guess, the philosophy around how we view ourselves, how we either hard on ourselves or we're not hard on ourselves, cutting ourselves some slack. What are kind of the core messages that you've taken from your journey that you now try and support others? Because I know you're hugely active on social media. Obviously, we'll include the links to all your socials when we put the episode out, because I think it's really healthy for a lot of people to see past the, hey, this is a great photo of everything that's going perfect this week and nothing else. Whereas your posts are a lot more in depth and a lot more honest than that.
The only person still trying to use Instagram as a written form of social media. No, but yeah, no, I completely take what you mean. And thank you. That was very kind. But yeah, I think there's a lot. I think you actually touched on something really interesting there about that hope piece. And I think, honestly, it's still something I struggle with some days, like being scared to hope that things will actually turn out all right this time. Sometimes I still find myself, if I'm in the pool and I'm in a long aerobic set, like thinking about what the next thing that might go wrong is, like imagining these scenarios where all of a sudden my life's about to be turned upside down for all the wrong reasons again. And I used to get really frustrated with myself when those things happened, and I was like, you can't do this, like this is what depressed Amber does, you're not depressed, you can't do this, you can't think like this, you're going to make it happen. But actually, like, I now recognize when those things happen to me, when I do get scared to hope, I just say to myself, like, you are imagining this because you things are going really well, and that's scary. And it's okay for it to be scary for things to go well, because when things are going well, we feel like we have things to lose, but we also can either just trust that for now they're going right, or we can spend all of our time living as though they're about to implode. And that's really tiring. And it's not something that kind of I learned to do instantly. It sounds so annoying sometimes when people are like, just trust that it might go right for once. But actually, like, it is that simple. It's not easy. It's really difficult, but it is that simple. And you kind of have to want to be there as well. Like, it's easier to live in a constant state of fear. It's easier to just think, oh, something's going to go wrong tomorrow, so that you never have to be surprised if it does, because that's when it knocks you for six, is when things are going well and something comes out of the blue. But equally, yeah, I think we're all lucky enough to be alive. A lot of us are lucky enough to be kind of healthy and physically able to do what we love. So kind of have to make the most of those days and know that at some point it's going to hit the fan, but until then we might as well enjoy it. And that was, like I say, that's something I still struggle with now, but I think it's really important. You also just mentioned something interesting about that, kind of another medal wouldn't make me any happier, like the other person you were talking about. And I definitely used to overwork in every sense of the word. Like, I was an absolute sweat at uni, which is no surprise to anyone who knows me or probably has a single conversation with me. Like, I was a nerd, and I still am a nerd, to be fair. And I still try incredibly hard in swimming, but I don't do it anymore to validate my own existence or justify my kind of justify anything. I do work hard, but I also rest a lot more than I used to be. And like that's what life's about. we don't get to the end of our lives and look back on the work we did. We get to the end of our lives and think about the people we loved. And why on earth would we wait till retirement to enjoy all of those things when they're not with us forever, frankly? And also, like, rest will happen. You can either choose to make rest happen, or your body or your brain will break and force it to happen for a prolonged period and with much worse consequences. And one thing I've personally got much better at is like planning in rest. So I will sometimes literally schedule weekends where I'm like, I'm going to say no to all of my plans as if I was busy, even though I'm not busy, because otherwise your entire life gets taken up by things that other people want to do rather than what you actually need to do. So I had a spare weekend last weekend, and because I'd left that weekend free and said no to plans, I ended up being able to book a spontaneous weekend away in the lakes because I just really needed a break. And I wouldn't have been able to do that if I'd kind of not earmarked that one weekend a month, which I normally do, in advance, where I don't allow myself to make any plans. Doesn't mean I don't do anything. Sometimes I get to the weekend and I might text friends and decide I'm up for it, but sometimes I do just need to hibernate, and at least then you've got that time. I used to do my PhD full time alongside distance training, and it just meant that the second anything went slightly wrong, whether that was, or even slightly right, whether that was me deciding to go out for a meal with friends or whether I kind of needed to be there to support family or something, like I didn't have any wiggle room. There was no extra time in my life for things to shift, and all of our lives shift. We always have things we either might want to do or need to do. And if we don't have wiggle room, if we don't have rest, if we don't have buffer time, we're just going to break. And then I guess something like we do all break in some way, shape or form, whether that's a little break or a big break. And I think a lot of the time when I went through my initial injuries and illness, I was so determined to not enjoy a second of it. I was determined that, well, I can't do my sport, therefore I must be miserable. Or I can't work these 3 months. I'm on sick leave, therefore I just have to be grumpy the whole time. And that's not true. Like, we get these little lulls in life and we get these little breaks that we might not want, but we've been given. And we can either be miserable grunt bags for the entire time, or one thing I've got better at is when I have to take these breaks occasionally going, well, this is a bit rubbish. I would much rather be doing other things, but I can still be happy. If I'm a bit ill, but like not contagious, can I use that time that I would have been training or working to spend some time with family and friends, or to read a book I've been meaning to read? And actually, kind of, you don't have to be like, that doesn't make you happy about being injured. That doesn't make you a less determined athlete or less kind of willing to work. It just means you're actually making the most of the rest time rather than punishing yourself for being ill or injured, which only then prolongs your recovery, or prolongs the time until you recover. And I think there's almost this huge taboo about like being able to enjoy any of injury. My hamstring injury, I was in the gym 10 times a week. That's ridiculous. What gym goer goes 10 times a week? But because I used to swim 10 times a week, I was like, well, I must do the same minutes of exercise I would do. And that was just absolutely ridiculous, to be honest. And I think that something else I really underestimated early in my career was the importance of my identity outside of Amber the swimmer. Amber the swimmer became everything about who I was. And I'm sure many sports people or people who have kind of busy hobbies can relate to, it takes up so much of your time that it's easy to let that become your entire personality. You end up turning down social plans or not being able to do other hobbies because this one thing takes up all of your time. But actually, if you let that happen, the second something goes wrong, all of a sudden you don't just lose your sport, you lose all of who you are overnight. And with time, I learned to kind of always make sure that swimming isn't the only thing in my life. Whether I have volunteering work that I do alongside it, whether I have another sport that I do, like at periods I've done climbing or I've done like different dances, and just having something on the go that isn't you as a swimmer, and making sure it isn't your entire personality. Because we also all leave the sport at some point. And it's the same with people who have jobs, who kind of give absolutely everything to their job, which is great and everything, but then who are you the second you walk away from that? And I think keeping all of us keeping ourselves grounded with our different interests. Like, we're all very varied humans. We all like different things. And if you don't know what you like, you probably haven't spent enough time on yourself. And I had that issue too when I got injured, and I was like, well, I can fill this time with things I like. I was like, I don't even know what I like doing anymore, because my existence was get up, swim, go to uni, go to swimming, come home, do more uni work, go to bed. And sometimes you actually have to spend time thinking about what you like as well. But yeah, there are a few lessons, I guess.
There's a lot of lessons there, and it's fascinating because when you actually list out the incredible lessons you take from any journey, but certainly in our world, in any sporting journey, there are so many life positive things that you take from it. I just want to jump on one thing before it slips out of my mind. You mentioned there around taking time to just sit down and read a book. Now, I know that's probably quite a novel thing for a lot of the current young generation of athletes coming through. It might be an audiobook, it might be YouTube, it might be Netflix. But what's your top book that you've managed to actually sit down and read over the last few years that you kind of went, I'm so glad I spent time sitting down, which I know is a really big ask?
Top book. I love reading. So yeah, I know it's not everyone's cup of tea, but like, I don't know, reading has been my escape like my entire life. And I stopped for quite a while actually while I was at uni, just because I was spending so much time like reading lecture notes or staring at a screen. I just didn't want to, but actually it makes me really happy. And now I do read almost every night, like even if it's just a page. I have like a stack of books by my bed, and it also gets me off my phone before bed as well, which isn't a positive thing. If I had to choose one book, that's a really, really mean question.
Okay, I tell you what, you can have your top three, and then you don't have to rank them.
I'll see what I can do. I read when I was at Worlds, I read Project Hail Mary by, oh my goodness, his name's escaped me, Andy Weir, who most people will know from The Martian. And I hadn't read a sci-fi book in years. And I'd forgotten how much I loved not just his work, but sci-fi in general. So my PhD is in engineering, so like I am a proper nerd, and I really, really like the like sciencey bits of his book. I also read The Midnight Library by Matt Haig, which honestly I wasn't sure I was going to like, but I found it really interesting because it makes you think about how life might have been different if you'd made different decisions. And I quite like books that make me think. And then I'd also add Chrissy Wellington's autobiography, which I really enjoyed. She's an absolutely incredible like endurance athlete, and just has a lot of, again, those interesting human stories from her life. But I know a lot of people really like self-help books, but I kind of feel like I do enough of that in kind of my day-to-day work anyway. And as well, like you learn a lot of things from reading, whether that's kind of in audio form or in written form, and kind of the ability to kind of visualize things, the ability to like make yourself think, or to kind of learn empathy or consider different viewpoints. Like, it doesn't really matter whether you're reading factual information or if you're reading fiction. And yeah, for me, it's just a nice little way to get out of my own brain before I go to sleep at night.
Fantastic. I love diving into the book discussions, because it's a lot of, been fortunate enough now kind of through the podcast and through kind of face-to-face conferencing events and stuff like that to have now met some of the authors of books that I've actually got to read. And it's really interesting how they write these things to take you on a journey, whether that's fiction or non-fiction. And it's really interesting that there are people who feel like they are so singular in their purpose and their identity that there's no time for that just to be taken on a journey elsewhere, whether, as I said, that's fact or fiction. So I really want to make sure before we wrap up we get a quick kind of dive into the stuff you've got coming up, but the projects outside of the, I guess, your own swimming journey that you're currently involved in, because they are hugely important, very, very much needed, and I know it's something you're really passionate about.
Yeah, so it's pretty busy here, you could say. So, well, on the swimming front, so 3rd of February for us and the 4th of February for men is the 10K open water at Worlds, and that's where our Olympic qualification spaces come from as well. So yeah, pretty big month coming up. And then outside of this, so I kind of briefly mentioned earlier that I run a not-for-profit organisation. It's called Athlete Interactions, and we focus on mental health of women and girls in sport. And that's kind of for two reasons, really. Firstly, women and girls have disproportionately high rates of kind of struggling with mental health in whatever form, whether that's something as everything from kind of body image all the way through to kind of depression, anxiety, or lesser talked about mental health issues as well. And on top of that, we know that we have a massively leaky pipeline in pretty much all sports for women and girls, and the mental health piece is a really important one for helping to keep those groups involved in sport, and that's why it's super important to us. So I think that we actually recently got funding from Procter & Gamble and the International Olympic Committee, which is really cool and hopefully will allow us to do some more exciting work this year. But the project that we currently have public that is probably most useful to people is our Athlete Support Network. So it's a scheme where we have lots of lovely athlete volunteers. They're all athletes, some current athletes, some retired athletes, and any woman or girl age 16 and over who's kind of struggling with absolutely anything. It could be injury, it could be illness, it could be just not feeling good enough in their sport, it could be a mental health issue, it could be they don't even know what's going wrong, but they just know that something isn't quite right. And we have our kind of trained volunteers available for a free and confidential chat, whether that's you just need to call someone once, get everything off your chest to someone who you aren't going to have to see every day and then never speak to again, or whether that's, you're in for a really tough 6 months and you could just use someone to check in with along the way. We're not medically trained, but we are supported by a mental health professional. And one of the things we do as well is actually help people go through the process of accessing mental health support, because it's so hard to do by yourself. And one of the things we offer is we'll sit there with you, we'll kind of go through what you need to do, we'll even be there on a call while you're making the call if you want to, anything to really kind of help support people in whatever way, shape or form they need. And we're also currently taking on volunteers because we have some exciting things coming up as well. We're going to be doing some research into, again, the experiences of women and girls with their mental health in sports, and hopefully running some events and stuff as well this year. So if there's anyone out there who would like to volunteer with us, then contacting me would be awesome, because we've got some money to run some things, but we need people to run them. But it's a really, really important to me, and it's been really great to see the difference we've had in people's lives already. We're a small organisation, but we're getting bigger, and frankly, I always said if we could just help one person, then that would be enough, and we've helped quite a few people now, so it's quite a good feeling for us as volunteers, as well as to know that people out there have got somewhere to go.
That's fantastic. And as I said, we'll make sure we include the links to everything you're up to, but also the other projects as well, and how people can get involved and connect with you and those organisations and find out what's going on.
Thank you.
I have one final question, and a little bit of a curveball, I guess. Earlier on, I said, what would you say if you could time travel back 10 years to your 16-year-old self? My question to finish us off today is, what would yourself in 10 years' time say to you right now? So what would your 36-year-old self turn around and go, Amber, listen up, and then say something? What would it be?
Oh, goodness. I mean, it's a pretty wild year, so she'd probably tell me to take a chill pill. With Worlds just around the corner, Paris to be or not to be. I'm meant to be finishing my PhD this year. I think she'd probably just tell me to enjoy the ride, which I'm trying really hard to do. And I do enjoy it every day, but there is also kind of a lot of pressure this year, both academically and sporting. But I don't know, maybe we'll have to see in 10 years. But probably just to be grateful and make the most of the opportunities, because they're not going to come my way forever.
Fantastic. Well, Amber, it's been absolutely fantastic. I know we've been trying to pin this one down for a little while, and it's been really cool to watch your journey over the last few years, but also really excited to see where it goes next. So just thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much. And have a good day.
Well, what an insight that was there from Amber. A huge thank you again for joining us. You can connect and follow both Amber and Athlete Interactions through the link in the show notes. As mentioned, this coming week, Amber will be racing at the World Championships in Doha, so please be sure to follow her progress. For our next discussion, I'm joined by another ambassador for mental health, as we speak to an Army veteran who has suffered from PTSD and turned his mental health journey and the subsequent lessons into a hugely successful and values-driven business. Make sure you hit subscribe however you're joining us today, and thanks again for being part of the Rogue Monkey podcast community.